Welcome to Module 3A of the LRC-South's Inclusive Education Paraprofessional Training Series, Universal Design for Learning in the Inclusive Classroom. Our objectives are to understand the principles of Universal Design for Learning, or UDL, and to learn how to incorporate UDL principles into practice. Here's an overview of what we'll cover in this session. We'll begin with a brainstorm activity, followed by an overview of UDL. We'll discuss the idea of learner variability and the goals of UDL. We'll end with a reflection activity and opportunities to dive deeper into UDL-related materials. By now, you'll be familiar with seeing this excerpt of the Paraprofessional Roles and Responsibilities Guidelines. Each module highlights different aspects of your role and responsibilities as a paraprofessional. Because UDL has applications across all areas of schooling, this module includes elements that relate to all areas of your role, including your support role, peer supports, active participation of students with disabilities, direct instruction to students with disabilities, and collaboration with the class teacher. UDL is a framework for learning and teaching that relates to designing curriculum and environments to reduce barriers and enhance access for all students. So why is UDL important for you as a paraprofessional? This framework is commonly part of teacher preparation programs and ongoing professional development in schools, but often paraprofessionals do not receive that same training. Because UDL can be applied across all educational environments to support inclusion for students with a diverse range of different life and learning needs, understanding this framework can help you as a paraprofessional contribute and collaborate with teachers to implement inclusive practices as well. So to begin, take a moment to think about your personal educational experience. Jot down, or if you're working collaboratively, share with a colleague, a memorable positive learning experience. Next, jot down or share 3 words to describe what makes that learning experience particularly memorable for you. You may want to pause the video now to complete this activity. Now look at your list. What stands out? Did this learning experience connect to your life or interests in a meaningful way? Did it involve choice or aspects that you could control? Was this a time during which you were able to convey your ideas in ways that worked well for you? Whatever your positive memories are, the experiences will be different for everyone. That's an important place to start when thinking about universal design for learning. Universal design for learning originated from the architectural design principles of universal design, which aim to design physical spaces to meet the widest range of needs possible to reduce barriers to access. For example, think about what ramps can offer that stairs do not. Stairs can be a barrier for people with mobility challenges, people who are pushing or carrying items, or those who are unsteady on their feet. Ramps, on the other hand, a more universal design approach to elevation and incline, are accessible to a wide range of people. While ramps may have been designed for those who use wheelchairs or mobility devices, these design features actually benefit parents pushing strollers or pulling suitcases, skateboarders, people with arthritic joints, etc. So universal design for learning takes the principles of universal design from architecture and applies them to reducing barriers in the classroom. Instead of modifying instruction for a few students, lessons and materials are used that have built-in supports and choices for any student who needs them. UDL helps us to rethink and proactively respond to what aspects of the learning environment might prevent students from learning or being successful from the start. Overall, UDL involves building in flexibility rather than retrofitting to adapt. It involves removing barriers by anticipating the needs and diversity of all students. And it involves providing the materials, resources, and interventions needed for students to access the general curriculum successfully. Across these modules, we'll dive into the principles of UDL and examples of how you might apply them to your work as a paraprofessional and in your collaboration with teachers. But the big picture is that UDL is, quote, a framework to improve and optimize teaching and learning for all people based on scientific insights into how humans learn. So UDL is based in neuroscience. While you certainly don't have to be a neuroscientist to use UDL strategies, understanding how the principles connect to the brain can help inform your practice. For example, UDL principles are organized around 3 brain networks that impact learning. These include the affective network, which relates to the why of learning and involves how learners emotionally connect, are motivated by, and regulate their learning. You can see that here in green. The recognition network, which relates to the what of learning and involves how learners take in and make sense of information, shown here in purple. And the strategic network, which connects to the how of learning and relates to how students organize and demonstrate their learning, shown here in blue. Here are a few things we know about the brain and learning. The most important thing to remember is that no two people's brains are the same, and how students take in and respond to information can depend on the environment. Two students in the same classroom will learn in different ways, and even the same student may learn one way in one classroom and differently in another context. This is called learner variability. There are vast differences across students, but the presence of that diversity is predictable. We also know that learning occurs over time. It's a continuous process that evolves based on the information, people, and environments that we interact with. This is called brain plasticity. Students bring with them a range of backgrounds and past experiences. This prior knowledge informs how and what students connect with in the learning environment. And finally, we know that our brains are goal-oriented, so making learning goals explicit is an important part of creating a meaningful learning opportunity for a range of students. So the information we just discussed is important for you because it can help you understand not only how your students learn, but how to reduce barriers and create more flexible, proactive opportunities to support their success. It's also important for students to understand how and why they learn the way they do. The ultimate goal of UDL is to help students develop into, quote, expert learners. Those are learners who are purposeful and motivated, resourceful and knowledgeable, and strategic and goal-directed about their own learning. In other words, UDL fosters student agency and ownership of the learning process. With the ultimate goal of developing expert learners, UDL aims to change the environment, not the student. When environments are designed to anticipate and reduce barriers, all learners have opportunities to engage in relevant and challenging ways. This cartoon by Michael Giangreco gives a helpful image to understand the fundamental purpose of UDL. Here we see an adult shoveling off a set of steps to the right of a snow-covered ramp, with a group of kids looking on. A young person who's using a wheelchair asks, "Could you please shovel the ramp?" The adult responds, "All these other kids are waiting to use the stairs. When I get through shoveling them off, I will clear the ramp for you." The same student responds, "But if you shovel the ramp, we can all get in." UDL essentially asks educators and support personnel in schools to focus on shoveling off the ramps to learning so that all students can access and be successful in the classroom. Let's take a look at some examples of barriers that are common in the classroom that would benefit from efforts to clear off those figurative ramps to learning. It's often expected that learning content and materials are interesting to students in the same ways. But because we can predict that there is learner variability and vast range of backgrounds and past experiences, we know that students will connect to and be motivated by different content and materials in different ways. Think about who gets left out when learning is geared toward one type of student. UDL asks us to think about how we can create learning opportunities and environments that plan for the variability in how students engage and what they bring to the learning process. Here's another example of a barrier. Think about a lesson that relies solely on students reading from printed text, such as in a book or a long narrative. These materials might really benefit some students who learn best through visually taking in text-based information, but undoubtedly, there'll be students who find these materials difficult to access, the text challenging to decode, or the content difficult to connect with in this format. Relying on this one form of representation creates barriers for students who have visual challenges, those who learn better from auditory information, those who could take in information more easily through a video, or digital materials that they can interact with or can tailor to their own needs and preferences. UDL asks us to think about how we can build in the flexibility and choice in materials in ways that account for this variability in how students perceive and take in information. Finally, think about a lesson where the only way for students to participate is through their speech. This works great for some learners who can express themselves easily and clearly by speaking. But we know that for as many students as there are that do so, there will be others for whom participating by speaking may be a barrier. Think about students who are learning English, students who can't or prefer not to speak, students who have anxiety or who are very shy. What about students who can speak but express themselves better through writing or typing? UDL asks us to think about how we can reduce barriers to participation and create learning opportunities and environments that plan for this range of variability in the ways that students express themselves. That's where the UDL guidelines come in. UDL involves reducing barriers or building those ramps to learning through 3 overarching principles to proactively plan for learner variability. These principles are providing multiple means of engagement, or the why that students learn. This focuses on making learning personally relevant. The second principle is providing multiple means of representation, or the what that students take in. This principle aims to ensure that all learners can access the materials and environment. And finally, providing multiple means of action and expression, or the how that students participate and demonstrate their knowledge. This principle encourages flexible means to achieve learning goals. Here we have a snapshot of the UDL guidelines, which were developed by CAST. There's quite a bit of information here, and you'll have many chances in these modules to explore these interactive guidelines. This is just to give you an idea of how they're organized and to help familiarize you with the tool. Horizontally across the top, we have 3 overarching principles, which I just reviewed. Under each principle, vertically, there are a set of guidelines that address how to implement these larger principles related to access, building, and internalization. Within each of these guidelines are a set of checkpoints with specific examples and suggestions for application. These guidelines are not meant to be a checklist, but rather places for you to start and prompts to get you thinking about how you can create better access and inclusion. We often suggest that when getting started with applying more UDL into classrooms, that you focus on picking one thing at a time to try. And remember, the ultimate goal of UDL is to develop expert learners who are purposeful and motivated, resourceful and knowledgeable, and strategic and goal-directed. So we've covered where UDL originated, how it connects to the brain, and what the framework looks like. As I mentioned, this information can empower you to contribute to more equitable and inclusive learning opportunities. While as a paraprofessional, you may not always have control over the design of learning goals, the environments that you're in, or the activities that students are expected to engage with, you can always play a role in incorporating more UDL strategies. Here's a few examples of how you might use this knowledge that you're gaining through this module. You might assist teachers in delivering instruction. You might apply and adapt instructional methods. You might choose to implement new strategies to support students' access to the curriculum or build in more options for students. You might work with teachers to collaboratively design more accessible materials for a wider range of students. You might work to build in more choice for students in how they engage, access, or share their learning. You might support students to engage in that learning in new ways and try different things. You might help to facilitate peer support. How you implement these ideas will depend on your context and your role. So as we wrap up this overview, I encourage you to pause the video to complete the following reflection activity. Review the linked blog post here, which is in the slides and in the resources section of this module, and includes a table identifying differences between UDL and traditional models of education. As you read, consider your current role and context. Jot down or share with a colleague 1 to 2 areas of the table that you might contribute to more universally designed learning approaches in your school. Think about what strengths you offer in building in more choice, agency, and reflection with and for your students. And think about who you can collaborate with on your team. We've compiled a set of resources for you, listed and linked on this slide and in the resources section, that offer a range of ways for you to dive deeper into UDL. You might take some time to explore the interactive UDL guidelines. You could choose to watch a TED Talk about the myth of average and how designing for the margins actually creates more access. You could choose to read a brief article on 5 examples of UDL in the classroom, or watch a 5-minute video that offers another overview of UDL. How and what you choose to dive deeper into is up to you. And just to note, the range of options and materials presented here is an example of UDL in practice. We've provided multiple means of engagement and multiple means of representation. Thanks so much for participating in this module on Universal Design for Learning in the Inclusive Classroom.